Uh, this is the Arts and Life show with Liam Cooper asking me questions again. So, Liam, go right ahead.
Well, this transitions a little bit into what I was going to ask you about, as I'm going to be teaching a writing class. Not that I'm necessarily qualified to do so. It's what we find ourselves doing. Let's say you have a student and they come to you saying, "I want to work on my dialogue. I want to work on my plots." How do you suggest they go about finding their source material? Right? Because there's so many books out there. There's a libraries full of books. How do you know where to look?
It would depend on if you're going to one particular genre, or you're going to start from a character-based perspective. Um, before we just started this conversation, I was talking to you off camera about your own writing, and we were talking a little bit about the way stories can be defined. And I mentioned that, for example, if let's say you're going to start something character-based, right now just popped into my head. I mentioned to you a few minutes ago that I've been contacted by a teenage girl, probably, who is a biological niece of mine from my natural family, who I haven't been in contact for 25 years without them. So that in itself gives some kind of mystery. Also, for example, I was just looking at some scars on my leg here. And I don't know. Well, I don't know if I can show show it,
I'll take
but
your word for it. Yes. All right. Oh, you're
so
really
now what happened there was I was in a
interesting.
I was in a fire as a kid when I was 6 or 7 years old, and
Mm,
the scars on my right leg, it's scar tissue basically, the whole leg. So anytime it's too dry or too whatever, the skin opens up and I get these sores. I lost all hair, so it's very clean and smooth, and often like a shiny thing. And then on my left leg, 40 years later, when I was 47, I all the hair, my left leg had been normal, but all the hair disappeared. It just fell off in one night, almost as if it was like a 4 decade later sympathy illness that the left leg fell for the right leg or something. So that's again one of these bizarre things that just using those two elements, the burning of one leg and then sympathy loss of hair 40 years later, and then a long lost niece coming to want
mhm,
to have a
mhm.
relationship with an uncle, which is fine by me, but it's a little odd. I could understand the father if I was a father or something, but those are the things. Now, if you're doing more historically based, again, you look up information on a character. Or, for example, just before
Mm.
you called, I was watching this channel called Scary Interesting that does a lot of lost people videos, or great disasters, or sometimes mysterious things. I don't know if you ever heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident. They did
Yeah,
a
yeah.
thing on that. Yeah,
Radiation.
and
Yeah,
was it the UFO? Was it the
yeah,
KGB?
right.
Was it this, or was it just stupid people doing whatnot? But you can again, this isn't plagiarism. If there's some little detail, or if you're watching a story about a missing person who then shows up 20 years later and claims they weren't the person or whatnot, you can take little elements of this story and pepper them in. One of my favorite techniques in writing, especially longer books, is I have a book called Center of Mass, which follows about 12 to 15 main characters from World War II into the 1980s, and some of them become obsessed with finding the Japanese person who was a mass murderer. Others of them just die here or there from breast cancer or whatnot, and you get a sense of their lives. And what's interesting is they all came through World War II. They all were affected by World War II, but the book is about the after effects. Because do I really want to write a World War II? But I mean, there's so many books out there. Yeah, I could do it well, but I want to do something a little bit different about the how war affects human beings afterward. So again, you can do it by just going to your own personal details. You can take little pieces of history or characters from interesting crimes or whatnot, and throw them. Even if your book isn't about a crime book, you know, if your neighbor has a missing child in that book, from the main character's missing, the main character's neighbor's child is missing, and you put in little elements there, that deepens the reality of that story. They call it world building now, which is a silly term that I just don't like. You're realizing things, making a little bit more realistic. Because even in fantasy, even if you're doing J.R.R. Tolkien stuff, you want to have believable characters that within the fantasy, acting in relatively normal ways, not just have every hobbit be a psychotic, say.
I would agree. I mean, to extend this, so let's say you're going to do some research. What's your relationship with archives? How do you go about finding your information?
That's
Mostly digital.
You can do it that way. I mean, I've got plenty of books. My wife Jessica was just saying to me, "What do we really need to have this book by Paul Krugman, this economist?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm not big on it, but I've got like 8 or 10 boxes of books of bad poets, and my wife says, why do you save all these bad poets?" Well, yeah, but you can learn something from bad poetry. If let's say when I start going back to write poetry, yeah, but I might find, oh, that's a really bad poem, but it's got an interesting premise. I can do that much better, and then I do it. You know, and the same thing can be done with if you're reading what's her name, Ayn Rand, terrible writer. She didn't have any particularly great thoughts, but her writing is so leaden. It's so dull. It's so bad. Forget about whether you agree or disagree with her silly philosophy. Her writing is atrociously bad, and yet people read it because they're part of that cult or whatnot. But having said that, if you were to read, Atlas Shrugged and find a 3 or 4 paragraph run that's that character does this or has that thought. It's stupid here. It's clunky here. But if I take another character and put them in a similar position in my work, it might work better. And so this is the thing. You have to just constantly keep playing and moving around. It's like if you pull the slot machine at Vegas and cherry, lemon, pull it again, cherry, lemon, whatever, and until you get the 3 lemons in a row or the 3 cherries in a row, and it's working. But people again, they want the easy way out. You have to just play with things. You have to go back over and over and over and work it. And hopefully, if you have some ability, you will learn over time the best ways to evoke something.
Yes.
It's not just being weird in your writing, but taking something and imagine it's dough and just pulling it this way. Or if you see people, with their thumbs and they've got the pottery wheel and they're going up and bringing it up and down and squishing it, doing this, that, or the other thing. Well, there are videos I've seen where they're doing wood turning and they're shaping things that way. Try, be bold, and if something fails, try something again. But people get so invested in, I've got this idea. How many times have you ever heard the cliche of a writer? Oh, I'm going to write this novel. No one's ever written something like this before. Oh, I just got to stick with it. It's just a fantastic idea or whatnot. And oftentimes it's like, I think when we were talking the first time about this woman I knew who was plotting out the lesbian version of Moby Dick's Captain Ahab's wife or something. And it's like this is what drives people. But if you do have something good, don't be afraid to try something. You can always go back. Like I said this many times, even on video to people. If you want to write a poem about your favorite poodle and it turns out to be about Operation Barbarossa, go with Barbarossa. You can always go and start another poem on the dog.
do what works for you. Well, since the last time we spoke, I believe you've written two plays, which, I mean, you're slowing down, Dan. What can I say? But so you've written one on Catherine the Great and one on Carl Sandburg. Following the last question, did these come to you or did you come to it? Did you say, I want to write about Carl Sandburg, or did you happen to see a History Channel episode that mentioned his biography of Abraham Lincoln or his poetry?
Well, with Sandberg, I've done that's about maybe the ninth or tenth play that I've done on poets, per se. So I wanted to do something
Mm-hmm.
on the man. So I look up a little bit of information on a Wikipedia or the Carl Sandburg, not society, his literary estate, some stuff on him. I pick out a few of my favorite poems or poems that could lend some dramatic insight into it, and then I look at some of the plays that I've done before, and because I don't want to just redo that and just switch Sandberg out with another
Mm-hmm.
poet. For example, I did a play on Robinson Jefferson and about his being a faithless bastard, always screwing around on his wife. I did one on Wallace Stevens and his relationship with his daughter, and how he was a bigot. I did one on
Mm-hmm.
another poet, Hazel Hall, who was an Oregon poet in the late 18th, early or late 19th, early 20th century, and she was confined to the upper room of her house in a wheelchair. And so it's one of the few plays I have that actually has a second story where she's talking to
Mm-hmm.
people outside. With Sandberg, because he was very public, and because he was such an outgoing character, because uh, he was a political activist and a musicologist and a poet and a biographer or mythographer, most people would say,
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
biographer. He's interesting, and it's a way, and he's got the character almost built in that when I could absorb him, and it was very easy to get into his character. It
Mm-hmm.
was a little bit more talking about his
His
daughter,
daughter,
his daughter,
Helga, and the.
yeah, and but now like with the Catherine the Great, there I again you push outside, and it's about a young black woman today who's reading about Catherine the Great, and so here you have what people would say sort of transgressive moment in that you have the A history, because a lot of people are angry now when you have white characters being played by blacks or other minorities and whatnot. But here you have a black
Black
woman,
person
and there's a
playing
reason for
a
her
white
to be
queen. Yeah.
Catherine the Great. Plus, there's a few scenes of gratuitous nudity and sex there, so you're able to do it because Catherine the Great was obviously, if you know anything about it, she was a lustful woman who took full advantage of her power to order men into her bed and then sent them off to Siberia or into some some inhospitable place. So that those are the kinds of things that just add a little bit something different. I think I mentioned uh, when we talked earlier how uh, creation is the product of ideation, having a good idea, plus execution, the ability to pull the
Mm-hmm.
idea off. And then that's when you have something really good. And so, you make Carl Sandburg, it's almost like he's in a one man
Yeah.
show kind of play, but with other characters, because
Yeah.
he'll turn and talk to people. He's aware that he's within a fiction. Uh,
Yeah.
with the Catherine the Great one, you have the going back and forth between the modern and the historical. I did a play about the Blood Countess Elizabeth Bathory a few years ago, and with her, I had her. The she was already caught and imprisoned, and she was being visited by some of the real life people of the time, her political retinue and supposed victims and whatnot. So you always have to try to pull something in a certain direction. The next novel I'm going to do is probably, if it's not going to be a novel on a pro wrestler named Superstar Billy Graham, it's going to be a novel
Legend.
on black people who left the South after after the Civil War, went to Kansas and Nebraska. They were called exodusters. I knew
Mm,
this black poet named James Emanuel who was born in
yeah.
Nebraska. His family was of that. So I've got a fictive version of his family, the Emanuel family, and the idea is I'm going to have this guy. There's going to be the black guy is going to end up uh, killing someone who's trying to kill a white guy, and they're going to be sort of on the run. But if I'm going to make it more of a comedy, more of a Kurt Vonnegut like thing. I've never really done a Kurt Vonnegut. Not that I'd be aping his style, but making it more
The sardonic,
sardonic. Yeah,
cynical, yeah.
because most people who are going to write about 19th century Jim Crow era blacks,
Are not
it
going to
has to
take
be
a
serious,
comical approach.
yeah, and this way it's sort of the opposite of Huckleberry Finn, whereas Huckleberry Finn is the wisecracker, always joking about this or that. To have a black character like, boy, those white people sure are funny, and have the character at one time try to walk the edge of having the character be he's going to fake being a subservient black person,
Yeah.
but he's going to be smarter than the other people of that time and era. Whether I said it in Kansas or Nebraska, I don't know, but and then if I do the wrestling, I did a book, a novel on a pro wrestler named Gorgeous George called Noir Kid.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh,
He was like well, Gorgeous George got copied by Ric Flair and Billy Graham got copied by Hulk Hogan. Were you a fan of pro wrestling as a kid, or is this just a American myth situation?
No, I watched the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in the 1970s before Vince McMahon Jr. took over, and so I
Far
remember
now, yeah.
watching people like Superstar Billy Graham, Bruno Sammartino.
Yeah.
Of course, I was smart enough to know that it wasn't real in the sense that it's not a contest. I mean,
Yeah.
these are big, strong, athletic men that can get hurt, but it in a sense it's so silly. It always struck me because I was always a fan of silent films. There was a TV show called The Joe Franklin Show in New York, based out of New Jersey, and uh, he often played during his 90-minute show, which was started at like 12:30 in the morning. He often played Charlie Chaplin, Keystone Cops, Fatty Arbuckle films, and so to me, pro wrestling was always sort of a mix of boxing and slapstick. And so
And soap opera.
and,
Yeah.
and, and soap opera, serial story. The superstar Billy Graham character, wrestler, was the direct inspiration, or he was ripped off by Hulk Hogan. He's so much
Yeah.
better a character, and so much more character. And he also took from Gorgeous George, and so did Muhammad Ali in
Oh, yeah.
the book
Oh,
I
yeah.
did. Muhammad Ali knew how to make himself the bad guy. I didn't like him as a person, and I didn't, mostly because of his mafia connections. But I mean, he knew how to sell. I mean, he was a great salesman and made millions of dollars because of it. And both he and pro wrestling, they're in line with this P.T. Barnum,
Exactly.
American
Carney,
American
yeah,
grifter kind of thing.
American huckster tradition. That's why when you mentioned your two potential novels, I said, why not wed them together where some P.T. Barnum carnival rolls through town and then you have the James Emanuel inspired characters commenting on the stupidity of these white people who are getting huckstered by some dude, fake strongman situation.
Yeah,
But
I may very well. In fact, I'll write that idea down now. I'll do Exodus mix with
two birds, one
wrestlers.
stone situation.
But
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
you're a fan of Melville, and as you'll know, I think what is it? I was going to say Billy Budd, but I think Melville's last novel is about a con man that comes to town, screws with the town. That's what I think it's Gurgle's Dead Souls is about. Some Russian guy comes to a Russian village, buys up all the serfs. People get suspicious about him. There's something old timey in Americana in the con man. I just love some guy who's not even that smart. He's just not a rube, and he comes to town and because he knows how to read or something, he ends up stealing embezzling half the town's funds or something along those lines.
Well, it's
But
if you look at like, I mean, that's a lot of the Twilight Zone kind of episodes are based on those kinds of characters that do something, and then they get a
what a
comeuppance.
great show! What
Yeah.
a superb writing, really is kind of.
Well, another interesting thing is one of the very underrated science fiction books is Planet of the Apes, Le Planète des Singes, by Pierre Boulle. The original novel has a twist ending that's every bit as good, and you don't even see that ending coming the way the film does. As great as the ending of the film is, and it's one of the great political endings of any film, with Charlton Heston banging in the surf futilely by the blown up or buried Statue of Liberty. But the original novel, I really wish I really wish that instead of this modern trilogy, which I saw the first one with James Franco, and I've seen clips of the other two, it just doesn't have the oomph that
No, they never
the
do,
original
do they?
trilogy did. But what they should have done, they should have just rebooted the whole fucking thing, or made a whole different thing from the original French novel, and then you can
Mm,
do that
now we're talking.
because the French novel, it's the planet isn't Earth, and the apes are modern. They have helicopters, they have aeroplanes, they have modern as of the 1960s. Um, but to me, that would have been a much more interesting way to go for that. And the thing that makes that story work is it's got character. The main
Mm,
character, whose name is I think Ulysse Maru, is a very well developed character, and you get little details that explain things that very plainly and very simply as to what happens in the story later. Um, but anyway,
well, and to circle back around, so many Twilight Zone episodes have amazing characters. They have amazing twist endings, but what I also respect is that not only is Rod Serling kind of like a sci-fi O. Henry in a way, he's just so good with his short form. But then he would just come out every now and then and be like, also, all you white racists are terrible. And to do that at the time he was doing it while smoking a cigarette with his suit and pompadour
as a
is
Jew,
he's an underrated American hero, basically, because I don't know if people my generation really watched that many Twilight Zone episodes. What a guy, Rod Serling. So, a question I had for you that I didn't get around to the first time was your experience with writing workshops. Because in academia, there is a strong focus that we be constructive, productive, but above all, positive with our peer reviews. And I imagine a Schneiderian peer review and some of these writing workshops may have been a bit critical of your peers. I don't know. What was your experience like in writing workshops, leading them and participating in them?
most of them weren't good. When I ran my Uptown Poetry Group, me, my wife Jessica, a fellow named Don Moss, and Bruce Ariel. There are four great poets right there, totally different from each other. There were other poets that I knew that came there. There's a fellow named Art Durkee, who's one of the most broadly talented artists. He was talented even beyond poetry. There was a few other people, a fellow named Robert, a fellow named Dave, and a handful of other people. In the 200 meetings that we had over an 8-year period, I mean, there was more great poetry, even or about to be great poetry, if they just worked on it a little bit more, uh, than probably has been produced in the last 50 years in all the MFA classes around this goddamn country, if not the world. Because you have to be critical, you have to be able to say negative, and you have to be able to shrug it off. I would welcome, oftentimes, negative criticism, because most negative criticism, like most positive criticism, is bad criticism. People will criticize something negatively. That's great. And if I know, for example, that this person, this guy, if he doesn't like it or has an adverse reaction to it, I know I'm on the right path, kind of thing. And so when you try to protect your feelings, you're ultimately screwing yourself, because your work is going to suffer. I mean, even if you believe that the other person is wrong, well, so what? Yes, and even if they might be a dick, I think I mentioned when we spoke the first time about the woman in the Custer poem who just made an offhanded remark that made that from a very good poem that was just missing one thing, to sort of like Rubik's cubing it and putting it in the right configuration and making it a great thing. But you have to be able to absent yourself from any personal emotions. And a lot of people simply can't do that, and they suffer for it. And ultimately, the other artists or the would-be readers of those artists or engagers of the art suffer from it as well, because the potential for something great that might move them even more into the arts is gone, because that artist couldn't take a good piece of negative criticism. There's negative criticism, there's positive criticism, bad criticism, good criticism, and you can pair them off in either way.
When you were doing these workshops, did you have a set weekly schedule? Was there a methodology there, or was it just hanging out at a cafe talking about what worked and what didn't
The only
work?
time I went to cafes were for poetry readings. Generally, I didn't sit in the cafe. I would go, if you watch that video of me writing the sonnet about Ed Gein, and that's the way I usually approach most of the poems. Now, I might have, for example, if I'm doing a Battle of Custer, I'd say, I may plot it out and do this, or I had a few of my painting poems that I call the 49 gallery. I knew that, I wanted the words to go in a diagonal, or the letters to go in a diagonal direction, to mimic what the painting might have looked like or something. But I mean, yeah, I was not someone who would hang around a coffee shop just looking for the latest cute girl. That's not to say that I didn't, if there was some talented and cute woman that I met at some reading, I wouldn't go for it. But just hanging out, doing that typical thing, people think that makes you artistic or artsy, sitting around in a cafe. I said, if I'm taking a shit, I'm still an artist, and a great one. That has nothing to do with it. I mean, I was doing blue collar work. A lot of these other people would work at a cafe, or they would take a class in Minneapolis. There were any number of shitty writing organizations that were all fucked up. New York had its own stuff. I mentioned that girl Maggie Estep from the New Eurekans, and actually, odd enough, a week or two after I spoke with you, just it came up randomly on my YouTube thing. She did this spoken word thing from 1991, and I'd forgotten her New Jersey accent, how strong it was, because it's been 30 some years since I actually heard her speak.
So all of that is very valid. I was somewhat curious as how you ended up in Minneapolis.
Because I'm adopted, and I was looking for my natural family, and I found that they were originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota area. Uh, they had moved. My natural mother and natural father had married. They moved to San Diego area, and I found that my natural mother had died a few years before I found them. My natural father, he and I never got along. Well, I wouldn't say we didn't get along. He couldn't. There was something about him. He was working in insurance, and he was like, "Well, I'll send you to college if you want." I said, "Yeah, but I don't need to go to college. I know who I am and what I want to do." For example, and then there was the sort of what was that show with Gary Coleman? What was the TV show? The black kids adopted.
Good
Anyway,
times?
no, not Good Times.
Oh,
It was the little midget kid, Gary.
yeah.
Um, not the
Not Family Matters. I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
but
Yeah, what you talking about,
anyway.
Willis? Yeah.
So anyway, I was the first child of my natural parents. I was sent for adoption. My natural mother didn't tell my natural father. She came to New York. I was put up for adoption. I was adopted. Uh, then they got back together when she got to Minneapolis. They got married. they had my natural brother, full natural brother, and then they adopted a black child into it. So they had that Gary Coleman thing going on there. And then when I found they never told anyone in the family though, not even the brothers that I existed. And so after about a decade of trying, after finding them and going here and there, and you know, I mean, I was clearly the person on the outside. And then after Jessica and I got married, there was an incident where they came to our wedding party afterwards, and there was they didn't do well with the people, the friends and family that I had invited there, and then they didn't pick up on emails or calls that I would leave, and Jessica would get increasingly angry. After about 3 years, she said, "Don't call them, don't contact them, see if they contact you," and they never did. Until a few weeks ago, this daughter of my natural brother, fully natural brother, emails me. Now, it's interesting because my natural father was married to a woman after my birth mother died. They got divorced. Then he married a third woman. Both of my brothers divorced the women that they married during the time I knew the family. And so I think this girl, this niece, maybe my brother remarried a woman from India, or an Indian woman. So I'm wondering if this niece of mine is half Indian, which would be interesting. Because I have a niece with my sister, my adopted sister that I grew up with, but there's no blood relation. But it's funny here. Now, this is an interesting thing that you could use in a story. I might have two nieces. One niece is white, but I don't have any blood relation to her. Another niece might be dark-skinned and half Indian, but she might have half the genes of me. So that's an interesting and ironic thing. And these are the little things in life that you can use. If you decide and you want to do that, you can use my story like that, just as I briefly outlined it. If you want to do something like that, you know. But people get so defensive about it. Oh, you're writing about this. You're writing about this person. Well, yeah, that's what writers do. That's what artists do. If you don't like
You
it, don't
listen,
hang
you
around with
observe, you
artists.
take in, you put it back out with your own spin on it.
Yeah.
So, well, it's just it's completely tangential to the topic, but so your family put you up for adoption and then adopted another child.
Yes. Because I was already adopted, so supposedly my natural mother, especially, did not want to, get into a court battle or whatnot, which I'm thankful for, and I'm thankful that even with all the shit that I went through as a kid, that I wasn't raised in California, Southern California, with a set of values that I would say that I don't agree with. This kind of entitlement value set that they had. It's one of the reasons my natural father and I, if I had grown up there, I probably would have left at 18. Whereas with my adopted family, I took care of my mother until I was 44, and she died. So for 26 years after my dad died, and actually over 30 years, because my dad he had Alzheimer's, dementia, cancer for the last 5 or 6 years. So I had been the man of the house from the time I was about 13. So for over 30 years, I not only took care of my mother, I then was a husband and other stuff too. So yeah, so
Well, and you don't have to get in this if you don't want to, but what was the communicate with your biological niece about? What was she reaching out for? Was it poetry advice?
No, she contacted me by one of my older and obscure emails that she was probably just found it on Cosmoetica. I've only gotten 2 emails from her, both the last 2 Sundays. I have the suspicion that maybe if she's only 14, 15, 16 or something, that they might restrict her internet usage, so I may only hear from her on Sundays. I told her, though, that she needs to talk to her parents, especially her father, and let her know, because I don't know if he still I don't know why the fuck he would have a grudge against me. I don't know why the fuck they excommunicated me to begin with, but I don't want to, but because if she asked me stuff and she asked me, well, why didn't Daddy want to talk with you? I'd say, I don't know, you'd have to ask him. But the thing is, I wanted up front, and I told her, you have to tell them first. If you're 18 and you tell me you're 18, then that doesn't matter because you legally have the. But I don't. It would be kind of weird to look like I'm trying to be
Yeah, I'm not. I was under
sub.
the impression she was like an adult reaching out. No,
No,
yeah.
because the woman that my natural brother, was married to when they came to my wife Jessica's and my wedding reception, uh, they apparently got divorced 4 or 5 years later. And this is the thing with my natural
Mm,
family is
I
is
see.
after my natural mother died, she had been good friends with this woman, and this woman's children grew up with my adopted and my natural brother as children, and then they just I won't get into why, but there was a thing that happened, and they just totally went they just totally dropped that family. They were never close to the my natural mother's side of the family. The two now ex-wives of my two brothers were constantly being maligned I, by the males in my natural family, and it didn't surprise me because if you treat the women as stupid and as second-class citizens, they're probably not going to stick around that much. And so
You don't say.
yeah,
Yes.
and
Who would
and
have thought?
yeah, and I'm gonna if I ever speak to my natural brother again, I'm gonna toot my horn and say, motherfucker, I've been married for 25 years as an artist to an artistic woman who suffers from all the maladies that most of the artistic community suffers from. You couldn't fucking stay married for a decade here, and you're on your second marriage. And well, but then again, my natural brother's an insurance salesman, so make of that what you
Mm.
will.
I mean, that's really punishment enough, I think. But I'm trying to, I'm off the top of my head, I can't think of that many poets who actually did sustain a marriage for that length of time. I think probably Wallace Stevens comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean there are a few, but I mean again, not every artist is going to be a nervous wreck who's all fucked up and whatnot. Uh, you have to have a bit of a spine, and you have to accept that life is going to have its ups and downs, and it's going to fuck you. And I mean, I've had a week that I've not been particularly happy about, but. Then again, a possible good thing could be this young niece. I'm hoping that she takes after my natural mother. She actually has the same legal name as my natural mother, except her first name is spelled slightly differently. So that's how I know it's her, because I asked her, "Can you prove that?" And what was the name of your father or your parents or my
Mm.
natural mother? Because she knew things that she'd have to be. So I've not spoken to her on a face-to-face Zoom call or whatnot. So hopefully that will happen in a few weeks or whatnot, assuming that my natural brother doesn't ban her from speaking to me for 3 or 4 years until she's of age, if she's 15 or 16 or whatever.
Always a possibility with these situations.
It could be, but my hope is that she actually that I'm not the only person in the family that the genetic lottery hit. I'm not saying she'd have to be a great artist of some sort, but maybe if she just has an interest in the arts. My
Mm.
niece, who's adopted, my niece from my adopted sister, who's the biological daughter of my adopted sister. She's interested in the arts, and she's very smart. And my sister says, I don't know where she gets it from, because my sister's like, me and my husband are dumbasses.
That was a major point of Socrates, is that wisdom isn't really inherited. You can have really smart, intelligent people with completely stupid kids, and then stupid kids give birth to really smart people. So
Mm.
that was his argument against the monarchies, against having, because it's not like, oh, this king was great, his kid is automatically going to be great. Socrates' argument was that his kid could be a complete idiot,
Well,
but
well, it's interesting. Was it Socrates? There was some philosopher. I was watching something online, and Jessica, what? No, she just recently ordered a philosophy book to read. But the person who came up with the ideas of stupidity, of stupidity being more dangerous than evil, because stupidity has a broader swath of potential. I forget Schopenhauer. It was Schopenhauer.
Mm.
That's who she ordered. Yeah, and that's who I'd seen. So yeah, I've never been big on stupidity, and I think Schopenhauer was scolding people for that they should be harder on stupidity because it causes more damage.
Mm. Well, there was Erasmus wrote a famous essay in praise of folly, but it was highly sarcastic and
Yeah,
bitter. So yeah, the basically at the height of this Protestant Reformation, Erasmus was just bemoaning how absolutely asinine and stupid most of their religious arguments actually were. And from what I know about Schopenhauer, it doesn't surprise me that he was a major critic of widespread stupidity. Uh, I got three poet names that I'm just going to kind of throw at you and see if you got any immediate reaction and a sort of what is it? Rorschach test, yes. So, Richard Hugo. Ever heard of Richard Hugo?
I have. He's sort of what I would call a typical, maybe not typical dead white male of the mid 20th century. He was a little bit better than average, but again, I'm trying to think. He didn't have as much raw talent as say W.S. Merwin, but he probably was a
Mm.
little bit better than a W.S. Merwin overall. Um, uh, I do. Let me think. Do I? Where would I have his book here? I know I. Let's see. I got John Berryman here. Let me see.
It's also on the list as of.
Oh, okay. Richard Hugo, Richard Wilbur, Kenneth Coke, Lewis Simpson. There's Merwin. There's Lowell. Let's see. Oh, Richard Hugo. Here we go.
There you go.
Spontaneous there. So that we want to. No, I did. Oh, okay. So here's my little notes from when I read this 30 years or so. So Richard Hugo, one, I gave him a 77 out of 100, which means good solid. Nature, hard-edged poems, visual, interesting rhyme schemes, often slant rhymes, decent poems, a rougher, tougher frost, no standouts, but no real failures, a lot of points of interest. Page 43, excellent. Formulaic but interesting points of departure from formula. Page 102, excellent. Page 113. So yeah.
There you go.
So that was my thought there. And you said Berryman was the next one.
Berryman, Lowell, and Theodore Rothke, if you got them up there.
It's pronounced Retke,
Is it? Refke.
or I guess in German it would be Retke. So let's see, Berryman here. What did I write about old Johnny B? I think Berryman's real name was Smith, John Smith, and he chose his stepfather name.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Berryman, I gave a little bit more than Hugo, 80. John Berryman, intellectual, good phrases, emotional, keys turned at good points, yet emotion subdued, all instincts of an excellent poet, yet lacks the catchphrase or great ending in poems. Good love sonnets, homage to Mrs. Bradstreet, powerful yet uneven, very uneven. Later poems descend into ramblings, pompous and shitty. Yeah, he got worse as he went on. He could have been a really great poet. The rest of the poets, I don't think I have the ability to find them here without moving all this stuff here. But
No worries. Yeah.
give me the other names again. Oh, Retke. I mean, his most famous
Refke and
poem.
Lowell.
Yeah, Retke. His most famous poem is about dancing with his father, clinging to his shirt.
Yeah.
That one. He's someone who I think could have been a great poet too. I would put him. At the same level as Berryman. Maybe a little bit more consistent, but again, Berryman has moments, especially in the dream songs, that they're probably
Yeah.
a handful
Yeah.
of great dream songs. So at his best, he's better, but much more consistent. I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
What's his name? Retke. And Lowell probably was the most talented of all of them. He's got some really great sonnets. But yeah, he's another one that it seems to me probably as he got older started doing the workshop thing. One of the things that was very prevalent in the late 20th century, and might still be, is these kinds of uh, writers who would go to these MFA, not the MFA programs, but these writing workshops, especially in the summer, and they'd be the professor always hitting on the cute young girl,
Yeah.
telling them. I went to the Brockport Writers Forum in 1987, and I was 22, and I remember there was a guy, William Matthews, mediocre poet, and I wrote about this in my True Life, I think. Uh, one night, I'm sleeping in a dorm room. It was like a week long thing. It was being hosted by a woman named Judith Kitchen, and her husband, whose name I forget, a Jewish fellow, um, and her son Matthew was there, and there was this woman. I won't mention her name, but I can give a good anecdote about her. Uh, but
By all means.
but this William Matthews. So one night, so there was maybe about in the whole dorm or whatnot, maybe about 7 other people. There were probably 100 rooms or something because it was the summer. I remember the 1987 baseball All-Star game I watched down in the rec room, and there was one guy with a broken leg there. But anyway, I get a knock on the door, and there's this girl that comes to me maybe like the first or second night there, and she says there's some sounds going on there. I remember, I forget particularly, but anyway, I ended up getting laid. And then the next night, the next night, I'm wanted to get to sleep, but I couldn't fall asleep, so I decided to walk around. It might have been after the All-Star game. I forget what date I went, but I'm walking around, and I get up to like the third floor of the dormitory, and in that the center room or whatever you call it, I see this William Matthews, and he's got 2 young girls. One girl I think had red hair, another one I forget whether she was blonde or brunette, um, and they're like doing lines of cocaine, and he's wanting to have like a threesome with them, and the one girl isn't having it, and so she's like she God, I can't even remember everything. But anyway, what ended up is she came and spent the night in my room, and Matthews was late the next morning for the thing, the workshop, because I guess he was snorting too much shit with this other
Late for the
girl.
workshop because he was up all night
And
doing rails the
and
size of a mare's tail.
and
Yes.
and
So,
and no, but here's the interesting thing is there was this girl who was really talented. Um, I won't use her name, but we were
Maya
walking.
Angelou.
No,
Yeah.
we were walking along the Erie Canal one of the days because I bought a few books, including some Robinson Jeffers books, The Double Axe, one of his great long poems, great book length poems, and uh, I was telling her because she was the one I was really attracted to. I remember she refused to wear makeup. She was wearing very Waltons, the TV show The Waltons kind of stuff. She didn't want to wear makeup because of whales were killed and this kind of thing. And
Sure.
I remember coming down a little hill because if you ever walk by the Erie Canal, it goes up and the grass goes up and down there. It's a very jagged landscape, and I remember like grabbing her and pulling her down, and like she fell on top of me. I remember we were laughing, and it was like a 1970s kind of movie there, and I remember we started kissing and whatnot, but I didn't get any further than that because we were in public. And later that day, I go it was the day before. There was like the closing party of the writing workshop, and I was trying to talk to her, but she was kept talking to this old asshole who kept insisting that James Joyce didn't have syphilis, and I, I, and she was clearly avoiding me. So I remember I wrote to her afterwards, and she never returned my letter because I really wanted to get her, write to her and whatnot. Years go by, and I during the 2016 election
Mm.
election cycle, she had claimed that the selection of Donald Trump by the Republicans had triggered her, and she committed a petty crime because of this. I'm I can't. I'm not going to mention what the crime is because I don't want to. I don't want to get into it. But it, it was just very bizarre. But getting then back to William Matthews is he had a son who's a poet who's probably even worse than he is, or a writer even worse than William Matthews is was because Matthews died. The son's name was Sebastian Matthews, and he wrote a Daddy Dearest kind of bio about what a scumbag his father was. And I remember one time someone told me showed me this. So I think this is maybe about 15 years ago. I sent off an email to like SebastianMatthews.com or whatever site he had at the time, and I said, I just want to, and I told him this little anecdote about his father. Just instead, if you ever want to write a sequel follow up here, this would be a great anecdote. I never heard back from him, of course, but.
So your experience with 80s writing workshops, indifferent? I mean, what?
Well, that's the only forum I went to where I ever had to pay.
I see.
I did go to. There was a. What the hell is in Queens? There was a thing called the Alliance of Queens Artists, the borough of Queens in New York, and there was one of the neighborhoods. It was anyway. It was a writing group run by these old ladies who would talk about the lights on the Verrazano Narrows Bridge being like diamonds, this kind of thing. And I was bringing poems in about black people being nearly lynched, or about gangsters, or whatever else I was writing about. They're very nice. There was I can't even remember now. There was one older woman who actually had a couple of poetry books published. They were mediocre at best, but she was really nice. But yeah, there was nothing to learn from. I mentioned the New Eurekan and Maggie Estep. I remember. Well, I'll give you a good Maggie Estep story too. And this also so Maggie Estep. One of the things that aggravated me when she died is that her obituaries left out two major plot points. One, that she was bisexual, and number two, that she was an avid drug user. I mean, things were going up her nose all the times that I saw her.
Sure.
And she was being handed around the New Eurekan poet guys, sexually speaking, much like a lot of the beatnik poets handed around Diane DePrima and a couple of the other quote-unquote female beatniks. And so, let's see. So Maggie, let's see, what was, oh God, see, this might, what were they going to say about her? God, I had an
Maggie Estep anecdote. We may never know.
Yeah. Oh God. It'll come back to me. No. Now I remember. So she a couple of times she was famous for giving blowjobs to someone who knows drug dealers or whatnot. And I had liked her, but she never wanted to get close to me, and she had said is because she had gone to this Ginsberg thing, this little bullshit university that Allen Ginsberg had set up with, and
the Naropa Institute.
Yeah. And then she would come back to New York after being away for 2 months, and I'd see her here and there, and she offered me one night, because she knew I liked her, and she apparently liked me, but she didn't want a commitment, so she offered me the only threesome that I was ever offered. I declined it, but it was actually with her and this tall blonde girl that I don't know if she was a stewardess or anything, the cliche, but I don't remember whether it was Maggie's apartment that she was subletting or vice versa. And it wasn't long after that she went off again, and I remember, and I never saw her again. I do remember one time I met her at Aqueduct Racetrack because she was big into horses, and there was this kid I knew growing up. This kid, I'll just use his initials, JZ, who worked at Aqueduct, and he would try to give tips to me to bet. I wasn't a betting man, but I told Maggie about it, and she bet and lost some money. I think on a few races where I told her not to trust this Jay-Z character. But anyway, so that's. But anyway, so with her, I did a few times. Try to talk with her about poetry and go through some of the poems that she would give me, or vice versa. But she again was someone who writing was not, it wasn't art to her. Writing was more of an identity thing. She wanted to be a writer. She wanted to be famous. She wanted to do these fucking silly shit videos. Um, and the same thing with other writing groups that in Minneapolis before I started the Uptown Poetry Group. A lot of the people were just, amateurs who didn't really look at art as some great human pursuit, let's say.
Hmm. I've heard William Gaddis say something similar, that a lot of people want to be writers, they don't want to do writing, which
Yeah.
is what a writer should be doing for the one would imagine. I guess it would be an interesting point to make is, where do you rate Carl Sandburg
Oh, I think
as a
he's
poet?
I think he's overall a great poet. He wrote a lot of stuff later when he would be able to focus and say he had an idea for a book of poems like Chicago poems or Smoke and Steel.
Hmm.
He could be very very good, and he certainly has great poems. I'll tell you four preludes on Playthings of the Wind, which I quote in the play. That's a better poem than The Wasteland. It deals with the same basic issues as The Wasteland, but it's
Hmm.
actually poetic. It actually doesn't go. There isn't Sandberg doesn't have to drag out or make obvious that he's an intelligent guy or that he's well read the way Eliot so insecurely needs to do. And
Hmm.
it's a better poem. It sticks in your mind a lot more. I also quote a poem called "Gone," a small poem about Chick Lorimer, this girl who just disappears and leaves everyone's life. And it's a very tender poem, and it could very easily have been trite, but it's a very good poem. It may not be a great poem, but it's a very good poem too. So at his best, I mean, he's right there with those people of his generation, the Frosts, the Stevens, the the Pounds, and the Elliots. I mean, I'd say he's better than Pound and Eliot. Certainly, he's I'd say the equal of Frost. He probably is not as good as Stevens, and maybe also Jeffers is he's below Jeffers, and Hart Crane is above him. But I mean, he's one of these people. These stupid periodic times when people just fuck around and they just dismiss an artist here or there for this, that, or the other reason. It makes no
Right,
sense.
right.
He's one of those that has gone up and down, but overall, he ranks very highly in my estimation.
So the in the Sandberg play, I was particularly interested in the use of scenes rather than acts. It almost creates this free floating effect because these time
I'm
jumps.
not big on acts. I did that in the first three or four plays I did, and maybe in two or three others. Probably have less than 10 out of my 104 or 105 plays that I used the three act structure. The scenes just for me seem more natural and floating. And I also try to do the plays so that there aren't big grand stages. It's just blackouts. Blackout ending it. You don't have to. There's a few times I have a curtain that falls for particular reasons, but usually I try to do the plays as simply visually as possible to make them as
Mm.
easy to put on as someone could.
The I like the what we call multimodal, the use of projection, just that, to delineate the time jumps. The That poem and the Catherine the Great poem both have these temporal leaps. Is that something you've just thematically been working with recently, or do you think that just is an effective dramatic thing to present on the stage,
Uh,
messing around with history and going back and forward in time?
it all depends. Uh, I mean, again, I've got over 100 plays. The form comes to me as I get closer. As I'm doing right now, for example, I'm doing, as I said, the Saladin and Richard Lionheart Crusaders play, and I have scenes, but I call them meetings. There are 8 meetings. Some of them that come after they've eaten, and you know, they're starting up a meeting again, or whatnot. It all depends. I don't even remember all the different things I've done because I try so much. And that's one of the things I've mentioned too about, you need to forget all you did so that you constantly come fresh to something. You don't want to just be boring the same hole again and again and again.
I see. But there wasn't any intention to make some statement about temporality on a thematic level with these last 2 works. They
Well,
just came.
if you find that and you can justify that, it doesn't matter what I matter. This is the thing I tell people. I'm the author, but again, as I said the last time we talked, your Ahab is different than my Ahab. Your Slaughterhouse-5 is going to be different than my Slaughterhouse-5. I'm putting that out there. What I intend doesn't mean a damn. If you get something that you can justify within the text that I didn't intend, that's great. And if you miss something that I intended because you're not a good reader, or I wasn't a good enough writer, or just something that first time and you don't get it till the 3rd time you read it, that's what it is. It's not like you only have one chance to go down and raise the Titanic.
Right. Yeah. The on a larger scale, I'm curious about this series of plays about poets because I think it's an interesting, you're kind of playing with the genre, right? It's a play, so that's in the drama theater, but the characters themselves are poets, so that you get these interesting. It varies from interior psychological landscapes to outright lecturing circuits, as you see in the Sandberg. So are these poets you feel an especial affinity toward? Were they?
Well, they captured my my interest long enough to write a play about them. Whether it's not like I had a secret yearning it's not like, what was that Christopher Reeve movie where he goes back in time? I don't want to go back in time and sweep Hazel Hall up out of her wheelchair and take her off into the sunset. But she's an interesting character who I think is, as a poet, the equal of Emily Dickinson, even though she's not as well known. And that's also a motivating thing to do it. I wanted to show that both Wallace Stevens and Robinson Jeffers, in a sense, could be dirtbags. One was a philanderer, Jeffers, and then one was an embittered racist, even though he's a brilliant poet. This is, I think, inherently interesting. How can someone be a scumbag in such a way? And plus, he was a good father. And the argument between Wallace Stevens and his daughter, Wally, is it his daughter Dolly? I forget now. But it's a similar name. But the arguments between his daughter and him, show that he was a good, loving father. And this is one of the things that people nowadays just don't get. And especially it's true, for example, with people who are Trump supporters. I work with a guy who's the assistant grocery manager where I work, and he's a real nice guy, and he's a metalhead he and his wife go to Anthrax shows, with the 50-something people. And after the election, he said, "Oh, who'd you vote for?" I said, "I voted for a third-party candidate, Jill Steiner voted for, but I didn't get into it." And he's like, "Oh," he said, "Yeah, my wife voted for Harris, and I voted for Trump." And he's like, "Yeah, I didn't ask him for that," and but he's like, "Yeah, I said I'd give Trump a shot." Most of the people who voted for Trump are going to be that way. Most of them are not inherent diehard racists. Yes, you're going to have 10, 15, 20% of the Trump people who are irredeemable assholes or whatnot. But there's probably a similar percentage of Democrats that keep voting for the feckless, idiotic, useless Democrats rather than voting for real change. So I don't judge people. I'm sure my sister told me my natural brother 20 years ago was a Republican. I didn't even remember that. I'm saying he was. I'm like, because that wasn't my main connection to it. My connection to him was a biological, genealogical, genetic, looking for someone who's like me. Now, if he probably isn't a MAGA Republican. If he's still a Republican, he's probably more of a John McCain Republican.
Mm.
I think he might, now that I think about it, I think he might have voted for McCain in 2000, which would have, the election would have been right as Jessica and I were getting married. The 2000, was it 2000? No, that was '08 McCain. So no, but McCain ran in 2000 against Bush. So yeah, McCain was running then. Um,
As a
but
dark horse, yeah.
yeah,
So I think that's an interesting take. Circling back a bit, I got a bit of a circuitous question. So a lot of people today eschew artists with problematic histories. They go, okay, this person, not to get into it, but it happens. Whereas you, on the other hand, almost that is their redeeming feature from a playwright's perspective, is that this is a great poet, but he's also a dirtbag. So I'm going to investigate specifically. I'm going to put a spotlight on this defect rather than trying to, hagiographize his history. My question then: would you ever write a play about a poet whose defect is that they're a bad poet, or is this poet series inherently a great poet series?
well, I mean, possibly, but I'm focusing on poets that have some kind of interesting story and what comes to me as it comes. I'm not you know, but to get back to what you were saying about defects in people, I remember there was in St. Paul, there was the Hungry Mind was the name of this bookstore. It was a well-known bookstore for 20 some years. It's no longer in existence. And I remember there was a woman who was the head of the ACLU, Nadine Strawson, who wrote a book called Defending Pornography. And I went to watch to her reading there at the Hungry Mind. And I remember, now this comes from someone who is a kid. Like I said, I was hanging around with gangsters. I was soliciting for prostitutes who would give me and my friends a little cut of the action. And I remember this woman got up and she pretended that her husband had made a prostitute of her, and she was doing the whole Ted Bundy thing about pornography leads to violence
Causes
against
people
women
to
and this kind
kill.
of shit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And anyway, she's bullshitting and she's berating this Strawson, and so I was the next one up that they called up the question, and I pointed this one. I said, "You're a bullshitter." I said, when I was a kid, and I took 30, 60 seconds talking about my background, and I said, what you, because she didn't know the right terms. She was clearly making things up. There was inconsistency that anyone who's ever dealt with a prostitute, whether she had a pimp, whether it's someone who's just placing ads in the New Yorker
Yeah.
or whatever, knew nothing about it. And I congratulated Strawson on her book, which set things straight there. And it's an interesting book if you ever want to read it. But it's funny because as I was leaving after it was over, Strawson was leaving, and they were like booing and heckling her. And as I left the bookstore, I was heading out there. The girl who I exposed as a fraud, she's like, "I hate you," and she spits on me, and I remember going like the, I was like, "Okay, you just admitted that you're a bullshit," kind of
Yeah.
thing. I didn't even say anything. I just sort of smiled and walked out. And but yeah, that's the kind of people. They would oh, and one of her friends said that I was an abuser of women. I said I was 6 years old. Don't you think that the 20-year-old girl who was using me to solicit was using
Yeah.
me as a child?
Right.
I wasn't the one using her. You fucking
Yeah.
moron.
6-year-old pimps are a real problem in the Bronx. It's a dark time there. The do you how do you work with your novels and your plays? Do you have to enter a different mode of thought, or is it hard to shift gears between those two genres?
No, but like I mentioned, I haven't been writing poetry since '05 because poetry, line by line, word by word, is heftier. it's I guess if you were to use it, it's the short of it. It's powerlifting.
Hmm.
Whereas both all the prose is more like long distance running, or maybe rather than using power, uh, you have to be a sprinter in poetry. You have to be Usain Bolt, and you have to be able to get out of the blocks and zoom
Hmm.
past. For me, I'm doing the marathon. I'm doing the ten
Yeah,
thousand meter
yeah.
race where you're going to pace yourself. If I try to get back into sprinter mode now, when I'm retired, I may be able to do that because I'll say on the weekends, what I used to do is I used to write. I would be working. I had a number of jobs that I worked Monday to Friday. I would write 4 or 5 great poems on the weekend, and then I go to my job and I take notes for the next weekend and write those poems. And some of the poems, if they were longer, I'd bring into the Uptown Poetry Group or any other poetry group I might have been going to at the time. Um, but so it's harder, and I know number one, it would be harder to go back and forth between poetry and then drama, short stories, and I haven't done short stories for a decade or more too. Simply, it's not my favorite form. So I basically novels and now plays mostly for the last 7 or so years. Although I've done 8 or 9 novels in between, and some long, hefty ones too. But it would be too much. Now, when I'm retired, like I said, I could maybe then do during the weekend. I'll do my poems, and then I can switch in the week and go back to the whatever prose I'm doing. But that's a
Hmm.
few years off.
So what's your process? Well, one, so you consider playwriting staunchly in the prose category.
It's it's concentrated, but in a different way than poetry is concentrated verbally. Um,
Yeah.
uh, Plays, really good plays, are going to be concentrated dramatically, and the difference is
Hmm.
I could write a poem. I have a poem called a sonnet called "Shonosaurs Drying on Nevadan Beaches." A shonosaur is a type of plesiosaur, and so it's the death moans of this group of
Hmm.
plesiosaurs that have been beached on a beach 120 million years or so ago. That there's no inherent drama there, but it's an interesting moment.
Hmm.
Now, when I'm
Hmm.
writing drama, drama can strip everything away. I can
Like
just have
French.
character
Okay.
A B says. I don't have to describe, Johnny wrinkles his nose and wipes it and then goes after
Gotcha.
Susie. It, and also because it's more of like writing a skeleton. The writing of the play, I can write a great play. If you got shitty actors, they're gonna fuck it up.
Right.
And
Right.
I can write a mediocre play. If I have great actors, they will do quite well with it. It's a different kind of thing. You're sort of like dropping cookie crumbs in the forest for the actor to follow. I don't have to do it all. I inherently, if you notice, I don't know if you've read how many plays of mine you read. I used to do a thing like the Charlie Brown thing, wah 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 wah, and I'd have MWAH just to give the sound of if someone was a foreigner we didn't understand. But now I've taken to using tildes because
Yeah. That
the
was
ti-
my question. Yeah.
the tildes you can let's say if I have 100 tildes, you can either look at them as 100 separate words that the character could say, or if it takes up 3.5 lines, it's a 3.5 line response. So I give the actor the way to fill it in. When I'm doing this Saladin Richard Lionheart play with the translators, when the translator is speaking to just Saladin, his translator speaking to him, we can hear some of them talking in English because they know the language that they're sharing. Same thing with the translator for Richard and him, but they can't understand each other, so we just see the tildes there. And sometimes I'll have just 1.5 lines, another one maybe 5 lines, and that allows that in each performance, each actor can then say, well, I can either use about a 200 words, or I can use just two lines there, and depending on which performance they might go, and
Hmm.
it gives more for the actor to do and gets them more
Yeah.
involved because it's not really that important since the translators are going to be translating to each other, so we're going to know generally what they're saying, but we may not know if I have a tilde and Saladin smiles or giggles to his translator, we know that they may have an in joke. What that is, it doesn't really matter, but that gives something about the relationship between the two of them. Whereas you may not have that on the other side with Richard and his translator. So you have to think of these kinds of ways to play with these things. When I first came up with using the tildes, was it in my Great Khan's play, or it might have been in a more historical play. I'm not certain. But I like it better than the want was. Now, if I was just doing a straight comedy, I might go back and use the want kind of thing, or something else there. Who knows? Maybe at some point I'll do a play for mimes. I don't know.
Oh, now we're talking. A commedia dell'arte. Well, in classic music, they used to do that all the time. It's funny because people think of classical music as this very staid, austere performance that has to be played exactly the way Beethoven wrote it, and that a genre like jazz is more freeform and improvisatory. But the reality is that classical composers trusted the musicians to be able to ad-lib certain sections exactly as you're describing with the plays. When you're writing a play, do you consider it as a sprint or a marathon, to use your analogy?
Um, it might be more like doing hurdles because you you're not doing something super long like you know 400,000 or 500,000 word book.
Right.
You're not doing a 14-line sonnet or a 10-line poem, but you're doing something that's different because it's not simply the writing. It, the omissions, what you leave out, what you allow for the director. Because there are sometimes I'll use stage directions and I'll say characters should be dressed in era-appropriate clothing. Well, that leaves a lot for the designer, the clothing.
Yeah. Or another common Schneiderian conceit is at the start of the play you go, lighting and atmosphere is more important than the actual dress, right?
But I mean, you're always going to have a little bit of that. Like I did a play. I've done like 3 plays on Native Americans. One is on the Mississippian mound building culture, which I have. It's called White Buffalo, which has a father and a daughter escaping from the town that's been ravaged by the white tribe, and they are the black tribe. This also then brings in modern race issues here in the country because the white tribe is the bad tribe, trying to extinct the black tribe. I also have one about the Mi'kmaq people of the Gulf of St. Lawrence and their meeting with the Vikings. And there was a very famous, fierce Viking warrior woman who had red hair who would dance naked on the ships. And this has been reported in some of the sagas. And so but the thing is, in there, the Vikings are the ones that have the tildes. We can hear the Mi'kmaq, but the stranger, the other, are these weird white people.
Yeah,
and then the fourth one is basically a 4-character play: 2 Comanche and 2 Apaches. The Apaches have been, and they are. It's also like with the Hazel Hall play where she's up on the 2nd floor. They are situated high or low, and on either end of the stage in mountains, they can shoot arrows at each other, let's say. And so that's actually a very Rod Serling-esque play because it shows these are 4 people who are going to kill each other no matter what. Their hatred. And the reason I do that is because I get sick and tired too of the noble savage idea of Native Americans.
Sure.
That they didn't have bloodlust, they didn't have slavery, they didn't have torture and cruelty and whatnot. And the Comanches were, in a sense, very much like Midwestern Nazis. They hated other tribes. They were the most hated.
No, there was a lot of intertribal feuding.
So, anyway.
So, I mean, well, I don't need to tell you that. I mean,
but here's the thing. You'd never see a play like that written by someone of Comanche or any Native American descent because they want to preserve the status quo that they are the permanent victims, and they certainly were the victims of white Europeans. That doesn't mean that they were sainted to each other. And I have every
Mm.
right as an artist to write that. If you don't like it, then you write your version of that
Yeah,
fucking
right.
play.
Speaking of writing, so is your process, you're working 5 days a week, thinking about what you're going to do on the weekend, and then you execute it?
Well, now I work in retail, so sometimes I'll have a Saturday off. Rarely I'll have a Sunday off. So it's much more. But I mean, I feel actually what I do now is in the mornings because I work usually from about midday till 7:30 or 8. So in the mornings I'll do the writing on my work days, and on my days off, like today, I spend time painting one of my rooms and doing some errands. So I do all my errands on my day off, especially if it's during a weekday,
Mm.
and then I'll do my writing. And then when I'm done with it, I'll email myself a copy of the play so that I don't lose it by tomorrow if something happened to one of my computers or something. And then I just pick up the next day and write another, depending 1 to 5,000 words, depending on how much time and how much ideation I have.
I see. So for a novel, you're looking at maybe a couple weeks of solid writing to get, but you get it done. You're,
Well, it depends. The last novel I did took, let's see, what was the last novel I did? I don't even remember fucking all the stuff. But for example, I did a novel about Tallulah Bankhead, the old movie starlet,
mm,
and that took about 5.5 months. I did that World War II aftermath novel that took about 9 months. By contrast, when I was younger and I had a more favorable writing schedule, I did the almost 2.5 million word Norwegian in a Family. I did that in 17 months. Um,
mm,
so and there, because I was working overnight at the time, on my nights off, for example, I would work overnight 10 to 6, but on the nights off, I would get up at around 10:30 at night, and from 10:30 till 7:30 or 8 the next morning, I would write, and I do, depending on how motivated, 5 or 10,000 words. But you could get, but the interesting thing, is because of the middle of the night, sometimes I find myself falling, asleep like at the wheel. But then I write, and I force myself to write through, and I would, I would get all the supposed benefits that people talk about using LSD or other kinds of drugs just from the weariness. By pushing
yeah,
myself and my mind there, I could bring things in. The world became globular. These ideas would be sort of like a lava lamp coming into me. Oh, here comes the orange stream, and it breaks off too. Boom, and now I have my characters. And uh, in a sense, kind of miss that. Although as I've gotten older, I don't miss it that much physically. But you find new ways, and that's how you go through
mm,
periods. You go through the blue period, you go through the red period. These are the ways, and ultimately you have to look at that as a good thing because you're not repeating yourself. Because if I don't have an 8 hour stretch over the middle of the night when my wife is sleeping, and I can do these things when I'm half falling asleep, you know, it I'm not going to be repeating myself. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. If I never looked at a Norwegian Family again, and I said I want to write a 2.5 million word novel and I remember the character, it would not be like it in all its ways. I don't know if you've read parts of it yet, but you'll see. Uh, if you were to look from like one to, I think this is 198th thing that I've written, and there's some collections that I have together. But let's say I have about 175, 180 unique works, plays, books of short stories, novels. Not to mention that I could put together 30 or 40 books just on the essays on Cosmoetica,
yeah,
plus my poetry. If you look at everything written in a kind of order, you'll see, you know, how things change here and there. And I go back and look at some of the writing styles from some of the earlier stuff that I did 15, 20 years ago, and I don't see, it's not just growth, but change, adapting to the subject matter, being, people will say, oh, Dan says he's so great or whatnot, that's such an ego. but when you're changing and adapting your style and your interest, that's sublimating the ego. That's putting the ego aside as an artist to let the best possible thing come through for your reader. That's the opposite of egoism. But most people are too stupid to understand something like that.
Yeah, I was, for whatever reason, I prefer the short story. Kafka talks about it, but the French have a word for it, which is, I think, the translation is second state. I might have mentioned this in the first interview, but basically that there becomes a point where you enter a flow state or something where things, as you put it, things become globular. And like you, it often for me, when I was a little bit younger, uh, came after prolonged sleep deprivation. And eventually that became a hindrance to my writing because I felt that, I was doing my best work after staying up for 25 hours or whatever. Well, that meant that in order for me to even start writing, I would have to wait 25 hours. And then, it's just not a feasible writing strategy. But as you say, you got to come up with new methods, and that's where these phases or periods come into play.
Then during the day, I'll get ideas and I'll put them on a little post-it, and I'll have 6 or 7 post-its that I have, and I'll go back after going through a draft and I'll add things in. And as I write and expand the play out, I'll add in certain things. And again, you're stretching the dough this way or that way, and you just add stuff like that. But again, a lot of people, and it just gets back to what I said before. A lot of people, like you said, they just want to be thought of as a writer. I've known so many people. I would go to readings, poetry readings, and they would say, "Oh, I'm working on a play," or "I'm working on this," and 3 years to write. I remember this woman who was writing a play on the poet Marina Tsvetaeva, a Russian poet. I forget her name. It took about 3 years. There's this old place in St. Paul called the Irish Well, and she came there with her then boyfriend. And they did then, I guess, a scene or two or 3 years later. And literally it was like, 3.5 minutes for one scene, 5 minutes for another scene. This took you 3 fucking years and it wasn't any good. And it's like, you're not, all you're doing is boilerplate here. Oh, she's gonna have a dramatic scene where she's railing against Stalin or this or that. That's it. The best that you can do with this great poet is have a scene with her railing about Stalin. This is the centerpiece of your play. Get out of here. I mean, you're not even serious as an artist. You're not even exploring Marina Tsvetaeva, good, bad, or indifferent. You could have if you're able to do something well, you can get away with just about anything. If you wanted to portray Marina Tsvetaeva as a real bitch or whatnot, you could do that. I don't know enough about her personal life to say that, but this person took no chances. They took no, and it took them so long to do that. But she gets to call herself a poet, or when someone calls them up to say, "I'm a playwright." She's a playwright. How many people do you know or have seen when they read? They'll list off 7 or 8 things. They're a polymath. I could call myself a polymath. I probably am more of a polymath than a lot of the people who call themselves.
You're a Renaissance man, Dan.
But I don't care. Just say Dan Schneider is going to come read his poems. I don't need to have these sobriquets.
I know you got to get going here soon, but I have 2 final questions. So it's not quite about writer's block. It's more that it seems that you've already accepted that this Rubik's Cube reconfiguration is part of the process. So my question was going to be, do you ever find yourself getting stuck? But I would assume you've assembled so many techniques and skills over the years that you always have something to try out, so you don't find yourself getting, stuck on the Tallulah Bankhead novel for 5 months. It took you 6 months to write it, but it wasn't because you're sitting there agonizing over what you were going to write.
No, whenever I get a chance to do something, I do it. My wife Jessica makes fun. She said, "Oh, it's Tuesday. You finish another play?
Yeah,
you started last Saturday. Then Tuesday you're done with the play. Tomorrow you're going to have what, another play?" But no, I mean, those are opportunities. You just try,
Right,
throw
right.
something at the wall again. And this. I think I mentioned what I called the divine inspiration fallacy the last time we talked. People, I need to be
Yeah,
inspired.
yeah,
No, get there, fucking get. A lot of that inspiration for something like a Norwegian in the Family came because the midnight ramblings of my mind that I was going down. And
yeah,
sometimes I didn't have to change anything. Other times I would have to polish it a little bit. But do it. Don't
yeah,
just don't just be a poser. It's like you're a writer. You shouldn't be posing like you're a 1980s rock star on an
yeah,
album cover. You don't need to put that third sweat sock down your shorts to make yourself look big.
yeah. The metal cucumber. Um, and then my final question was, with these poet plays, what's your strategy for getting their voice, or is the getting their voice necessary in all these cases?
No, I mean now with Sandberg, because Sandberg is on film. He's
Yeah, exactly,
you
exactly.
you can get the cadences of his voice very easily. I do have, if I ever really needed to, and I was going to do a poet, there was a thing, not voices and visions. There was a poetry project that had about 40 or 50 poets reading their own poems, but a lot of them you can't really get a sense of them. But you have I'm going to construct my version of Wallace Stevens. Why not?
You're right, right.
You know,
Well,
if
and some poets are bad readers of
Yeah,
their
I
own
mean,
work.
if in
So,
50 or 100 years someone wants to construct their version of Dan Schneider in a play, if they want to redo the thing with the fake prostitute spitting at me because I
yeah,
defended the woman who wrote about defending pornography, if they want to use that, fine.
yeah.
This is one of the things that I find with not only the literary estates of individuals, uh, but also when I tried to do a series of interviews with people who were the heads of Native American tribes a few years ago. What I found out was most Native American political leaders in their tribes don't really give a shit about doing anything of any value to make their lives better, as long as the people at the top can get their stuff.
Oh,
I
that's all
remember,
they
I
get, right?
remember, I remember trying to get in contact with the people who were actually elected within Indian tribes. Not only did they not want to do it, they sometimes hated other tribes. They, I remember this one asshole wrote a real, I forget his name, but he wrote a real nasty email back, and I told him, "Fuck you, motherfucker," and I ripped him out. And then I had written some other Native Americans there, and they're like, "I will not do your show, Mr. Schneider." Now they would not have even answered my email had I not ripped this motherfucker for being an
Right,
asshole.
right.
And on top of that, uh, these people, there are some books written about certain tribes, so I would contact some of the people. These were white people. Now, when I would contact them and say, "Well, you wrote, the book, The History of the So and So Tribe. You want to talk about?" "Oh no, I can't talk on behalf of the tribe. You need to get someone who's really that." You wrote a fucking book. You're making money off them. I can't pay you, so because I can't pay you, you don't want to fucking
No,
talk.
you well, of course, yeah.
So I mean, these are the kinds of phonies that you deal with not only in political things like with these tribes people and their white people who still take advantage of them or whatnot, but it's the same thing with a lot of. I'll give you an example. I did a poem on this play on this poet Jessica Powers. She was a Carmelite nun. Uh, I thought maybe it might be interesting. I wrote to the Carmelite nunnery where she had lived until the 70s when she died, or maybe it was the early 80s. And I never heard back from them. I said, I wrote this poem about her name was Sister Miriam, but her real name was Jessica Powers. I said, I wrote this play about Sister Miriam. I was wondering if you might be interested. Thinking that maybe they'd want to produce a play about her or what.
Sure.
Don't hear anything back.
No, no.
I mean, so when you and I've got books that, "Oh, she was so wonderful. She was such a great devotee of this, that, or the other thing." In reality, they don't give a shit. They just
No.
they just are using it to market her book to make a little bit of money at a collection plate or whatnot. They don't give a shit about anything deeper. And it's that way with the tribes. It's that way with these religious, and the occasional literary estate. But like I said, if someone ever want to do something about me, I told my wife and the people I've got written in my will. I said, let people do what they want. There's no such thing as bad publicity. Now, if someone wanted to say that Dan was, the Texas rapist who raped 37 women and it's not true, that's
He was the Boston Strangler, yeah.
yeah, that's kind of ridiculous. Unless it was going to be some kind of comedy or whatnot. But other than that, if they want to, if they want to display me in a not so nice way, who cares? I don't care. I know who I am. My wife knows who I am. The people who know me know who I am. I don't need validation from people who haven't been born yet.
Absolutely. I think that's a pretty solid place to end. I would just add, I think you mentioned you're working on a play about Saladin and Richard Lionheart.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for an Old English class, I discovered that King off of Mercia, Old English king, had coins minted that copied the gold dinars of Islamic caliphate. So there's these Old English coins
Yeah.
that have these terrible attempts to say, we praise Allah, but they don't know Arabic, so it's all muddled.
It's funny. There's a show that does pawn shop kind of thing, PAWN pawn shop.
Yes.
And some guy brought in some coins from the Levant somewhere. I claimed they were 3,000, 4,000 years old or something, and they got some expert in, and the guy said they probably were, and they could be worth several $100,000 or whatnot. But then, I guess in typical cable TV fashion, there was some kind of fuck up or something. And that's always interesting to see that kind of stuff. But again, you can take it from high or low. You can take it from a well-known historian, or you can take ideas just from watching some story about a guy who faked his own death and came back. The poet Weldon Keys disappeared supposedly into San Francisco Bay. He probably jumped off the Golden Gate or something. Parked his car, and then no one ever saw him again. And so, I did a play on that. And again, I don't even remember my basis for it, other than things leading up to it. I think I might have done something a little bit more like the Sandberg play. But again, and if you listen to me here, there are so many people, like this woman who did the Marina Tsvetaeva play. She'll be like, if you asked her, if you were interviewing her on like some cable TV outlet of the 80s or 90s, they're so precious. Oh, they act as if they're the Saladin and Lionheart play is called the Congregants. They act as if they're at the temple of worship for this person. Don't worship an artist. Don't worship me. Don't worship Whitman. Don't worship Kubrick. Don't worship Shakespeare. See them as individuals, people in their place and their time. They'll be far more interesting than as some sainted figure. So people just need to get that out of their fucking system and just deal with reality in general.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts, comments?
No, I need to drink a little bit more water. My throat is getting dry.
Yeah.
So.
Much
Anyway,
appreciated.